So this kind of brings us full circle, and I want to touch a little bit on the importance of delaying that weight gain process, right? So many of us on this podcast have kids. We see our kids, and we know where obesity is in America, whether it's young people, it's average American, it's elderly people. Talk about some of the challenges once you get into the additional weight gain, obesity, how prediabetes kicks in, diabetes kicks in, and how there is science behind why it's so challenging to reverse that.
There is. So I'm going to draw a real quick picture. I think pictures are worth 1,000 words. Okay. So if we were to look at glucose levels, okay, between 70 and 100 is considered normal.
Right.
In fact, if you go get your fasting blood work done, they'll tell you if you're between 70 and 100 that your blood work's fine. Okay. But what happens at 100 is they diagnose a condition called prediabetes. Okay.
Yep.
And prediabetes, if you kind of pull back the curtain and look at what's happening with insulin, you're still releasing lots of insulin, but the effectiveness of that insulin is dropping. Okay. So this is, they still may be producing tons of insulin, but the insulin effectiveness, the signaling percentage, its efficiency is dropping.
So
when that drops, the sugars go up.
So that's how it starts. So, there's
Yes.
a lot of, you see on TV, there's so many commercials about managing your diabetes and A1C. And I don't want to create fear or paranoia here, but I really want to talk about why it's so critical to get ahead of this as soon as you can. Mm-hmm. So we had a conversation a few weeks ago that spurred this topic for this podcast. I really wanted to talk about how when you become pre-diabetic and diabetic, that wall to overcome becomes higher and higher and more challenging. So the takeaway here is to try to get ahead of that, but talk a little bit about how, leptin, ghrelin, adiponectin work with pre-diabetic and diabetic patients specifically.
Okay, I want to finish this one graph and then I'll
Sure.
do it, because this is a critical part of the answer. Okay, so at 100, when you get diagnosed with prediabetes, which means you're on the train and it's starting to move, already 50% of your insulin cells are not signaling correctly.
Wow.
Okay, when you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at 125 fasting, 80% of those cells are now not working. Okay, and it only gets worse. Medication can help, but medication, you're chasing the sugars. You're still not getting what's behind it, which is the insulin resistance.
Right.
And insulin resistance causes inflammation in the body, which also brings your blood sugars up. Insulin resistance causes problems with heart disease and cholesterol and hypertension. So there's a lot of things that insulin resistance is doing in the background. And to go from pre-diabetic to diabetes is usually less than 7 years. So you're on a train and it's picking up speed. Okay. It's easier to stop the train when it was just getting started.
Yeah. It's
going to be easier to reverse where you are if you're at 100 versus 150 or 200 or 300.
Right.
Okay.
So a lot of takeaways here. And again, I want to go back to how the leptin, ghrelin, adiponectin play in for pre-diabetic and diabetic patients. But all of this taken holistically, the takeaway message is, metrics, measuring, Oura rings, always measuring, getting blood levels, baseline blood levels and glucose and insulin levels measured early in life is really important. I don't want to make that an additional topic. I just want to call out how critical it is. And people like Mary are experts in diagnosing and knowing what metrics to look at. But let's then circle back on the leptin, ghrelin, adiponectin with pre-diabetic and diabetic patients, because what you said it took my breath away with the challenges that come with pre-diabetes and diabetes as it relates to these three hormones.
Well, again, this insulin resistance has been building for a while. Chances are for the previous 15 to 20 years, you've been producing too much insulin, or the person has. They produce too much insulin because they overeat on the readily available and abundant carbohydrates we have. Okay, insulin really can't do a whole lot with protein foods, with healthy fats, and with vegetables. So I tend to think of those in the abundance column. The intentionality, the very mindful thing you have to keep your eye on is what kind of carbohydrates and how much are you having?
Right.
It's okay to have a small amount, let the insulin levels go up, let them come back down. But when you're eating a typical fast food meal, instead of about 30, 45 grams of carbohydrate at the meal, you might have a significantly higher number.
So the takeaway in all of this, again, we had said prior to is, the longer you wait, the longer you allow prediabetes to turn into diabetes, and then for diabetes to sustain, it makes it almost impossible or extremely challenging to reverse. So I think the takeaway here is not that we want to create fear, but that is get to someone you trust to get some baseline blood sugar, insulin levels, A1C measured, and see where you are and start having the conversation. And part of the purpose of this Inside Out Alignment show and the podcast is to educate people on this reality of what's going on. We eat these foods and we think there's no consequences. I don't feel a certain way, right? I don't feel like I'm getting sick. I don't feel like there's all this inflammation in my body. But what happens, and we've talked about this with my patients and my clients and your clients, is so much time has passed because they weren't aware. And now that hurdle is so high to overcome. So takeaway is people like Mary, someone I trust at a very high level, who's really, really talented in this area, can help educate you and do the things that are required.